Hey, welcome back, friends, to Terraverse TV. As I told you on our last session with Dr. Charlie Camarda, our esteemed astronaut and chief engineer, or actually the director of engineering at the Johnson Space Center, we had a great conversation. I promised you that I'd bring Charlie back. You also might have seen the Terraverse TV holiday party we had at the end of the year where Charlie gave a wonderful presentation. If you haven't seen that, you need to go see that. We talked about Charlie's book, but then something popped up on the news, and we're going to get to that. I thought, what better thing than bring Charlie in and let him tell us what we really should know about, Trump's ideas about what to do at NASA. So before we get started, I'm going to just say, if you want this content, if you like Charlie, and I bring people like Charlie on, and if you want to be part of this community, subscribe, hit the like button, send us your comments, hit the bell for updates so you can be on top of new things when we bring them out there. Now, just for you who have not been on the prior shows, Dr. Charlie Camarda is an astronaut. He flew on the Discovery mission right after the Columbia crash. He was the engineer that helped NASA solved the problem that happened when a piece of foam also hit Discovery, just like it did for Columbia, and they almost thought they were never going to get back to Earth. But they solved the problem. They did a spacewalk. They fixed the issue. They got back safely. The commander for that mission was Eileen Collins, a wonderful woman. Charlie and I, Charlie knows her. Obviously, he flew with her, but I met her through Charlie, and they did one of the most incredible missions ever to do what they did. She had to flip the shuttle over so they could take pictures of it. They had to solve the problem while they were up in space. It was an amazing thing. It shows you how great our astronauts are and our NASA used to be. Charlie's going to tell you why, in his book, why NASA needs to reclaim its glory. They've gotten away from being researchers and they've gotten more into being bureaucrats, which is, I've been talking about quite a bit throughout the whole country. All of our bureaucracies are broken and we need to fix them. And Trump has come in saying he's going to try to do that. So we want to talk about one of the things. So Charlie, before we get started again, I want to thank you for joining us. We're going to play a clip. Charlie's going to play a clip from News Nation where they talk about Trump's, initial plans for NASA. And as you know, I'm going to preface this before we get into this, is that, Trump makes a lot of claims. They're often very bold and often, more of an aspiration than a reality. But it's encouraging that he at least has aspirations and he's thinking about this in a big way, because that's what it's going to take. Charlie will tell you why. So Charlie, why don't we play the clip and then we'll get into the details.
Sure thing, John. For the viewers, though, I'm retired. I used to be director of engineering right after I flew in space, and then I went to work in the NESC. But let's play the tape and let's hear what Trump's vision is, or we think his vision is for NASA.
The report shows that the incoming Trump administration could overhaul NASA with lofty goals like getting humans to Mars by the end of his term. News Nation's Xavier Walton joining us now to break it all down. Xavier, how likely is this to happen? U.S. citizens on Mars.
Well, that is a loaded question. That's what I even asked a retired NASA astronaut. But hey, let's get to some of these other potential goals the Trump transition team has been looking at and working on. Again, lofty goals, so to speak, in some of these. Here's the list now. You just mentioned one of them. Getting humans back to the moon, though, by 2028 and Mars. We're going to see how realistic that is. Cancel the costly rocket launch system. Possibly the Orion spacecraft, consolidate Goddard and Ames research centers, more NASA headquarters to a field center, reduce the admin presence in D.C., redesign. So these are what these are. This is what the Trump transition team put together to potentially work on when Trump takes office here in just a couple of weeks. One idea, though, retired NASA astronaut Jose Hernandez agrees with. That last one there, the Artemis lunar program, to make it more efficient. Some of the others, he says, are unrealistic. Here's his take on potential moves for NASA by incoming Trump administration.
Some of it makes sense, and some of them are kind of like head scratchers. Mars is at least 10 to 15 years away. There's no way we're gonna get there in 2028. simply because of the technical hurdles and what could happen to our bodies during long duration space travel, that we're not gonna be able to send humans by 2028.
So essentially saying it's not physically possible by 2028 to get to Mars, but immediately after that, Nick, he did say he was pretty confident that we could get, and I say we, I mean Americans, like I'm not going to space, but no, to get man and woman back on the moon by 2028, Nick.
All right, so Charlie, do you know Jose, by the way, the retired astronaut?
Yes. Jose Hernandez was in the class after me, I believe, and he and Danny Olivas were two of the astronauts in that same class. You saw them in that clip together when they were getting ready for their mission. About what Jose had to say, I agree with him that we probably will not have boots on the ground on Mars in 4 years. I think that's a very, very difficult and very ambitious goal. But I wouldn't be surprised if Musk could pull off a mission around the moon with a crew of astronauts coming back. I mean, around Mars, coming back to Earth. I think that's a goal that I wouldn't be surprised if Trump takes on and just might be successful.
But he'll have to team up with Elon to do that, right? I don't. Do we have?
No, I meant that's something that Elon could do.
Okay.
Elon Musk will probably be able to do it. There's no way, no how NASA would be able to do something like that.
Well, then, will Elon then make NASA completely redundant if that's the case?
Obsolete,
Yeah.
irrelevant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point. NASA's gotten to the place where, like you and I have talked about, John, it's a bloated bureaucracy. It's a mere shell of what it used to be. It doesn't have the technical expertise. I mean, what you see Elon getting ready to do on his next launch of Starship, advanced thermal protection systems, looking at metallic, looking at actively cooled thermal protection systems, not just the ceramic tiles. He is advancing the state of the art. This is something that NASA used to be able to do when we were a research organization. The problem is the human spaceflight program is so bloated that it basically takes the money that used to go into research and hasn't been going into research for about 35, 40 years.
Okay, so let's cover let's just go down that list. I want to talk about each one. So Mars, not likely on the ground, but Elon could possibly get something in the orbit with astronauts. Unlikely NASA could even pull that off in 4 years, right? Okay.
No way. Nope.
Humans back to the moon. Is that something we should even consider doing? Is it necessary? Does it help us move the ball? Or what do you think about that?
I really have not seen a good reason, a solid reason for why the United States needs to go back to the moon. If it's not for a military reason, I don't see any legitimate civilian reason for us going back to the moon. I know NASA tends to think that this is kind of like a training ground for us to learn how to build things on the surface of the moon, how to build a base, how to use in situ resource utilization, which is basically living off the land to develop fuel, to develop mortar for construction and things like that. I don't see that as being a plausible reason for us to go back to the moon.
Okay,
because things are so different on Mars. It'd be totally different technology. We would have to develop totally different spacesuits, totally different environment. I think, quite frankly, I think Elon Musk is correct. I think it's a distraction. I think it's an opportunity for NASA to do things close to Earth with humans,
right,
and to try to regain some of its past glory. But what you see happening right now with Artemis is a disaster. It's been delayed. They're having problems with the heat shield, and we're falling on our face, and we're looking bad. And this is what I cautioned NASA before I retired from NASA. I told them, If we make it about a race to go back to the moon, we might lose that race to the Chinese. And at the rate we're going, we could potentially lose a race, the next space race, to the Chinese. And I told the administrator, why not set our goals to Mars, which is a true epic challenge, where we have landed robotic landers there very successfully. Our folks at JPL are doing an amazing job. And why don't we follow that as a real epic challenge and let NASA go back to becoming an applied research organization? And that's going to take some doing.
So on that point, and I think I hear you correctly, why go after a battle for the moon when we already probably learned as much as we need at the moment? We need to go to Mars. If we go try to play with, the game with the moon, we lose to China, we look bad, right? We probably win the game to go to Mars, or at least that's a much better and more important battle anyway, for supremacy of our technology. So I agree with you. Why do something that doesn't make any sense? We probably lose, and it doesn't bring us any value. Now, other than, and I have to ask this question, Charlie, because all my friends will kill me otherwise, don't we want to go up there and check on the dark side of the moon, see what those aliens are doing at their base?
The Chinese are already there. Maybe we should ask them.
They probably have a base there.
They put a robotic lander there. Unless mining the moon's surface and actually getting consumables, people think that we can actually get consumables from the surface of the moon because they have water there. And so we can generate hydrogen, oxygen, potential fuel, and use, make drinking water. But can we do it in enough quantity to actually help us build and transport vehicles, refuel them in low lunar orbit, when we're pretty certain we could do that in a Mars orbit, for instance? We could do it mining the resources on Mars. We have methane, we have water, potentially on the surface of Mars. And the way we'd have to do that, we'd have to do it robotically anyway. What you'd want to be able to do is send robots basically on the surface of Mars to basically mine for these consumables and build storage facilities so that when we send ships to Mars, we have fuel and we have water waiting for the ship to come back home. That was one of the plans for going to Mars. Now, if we were going to test our robotic capability and use the moon purely for robotic activity, and for building and constructing things on the surface of the moon, I say fine. But the minute you put humans in the mix, you have orders of magnitude increased cost and risk to do that.
And that's just sort of a virtue, right? We don't need them. We should be doing this with robotics, unless we plan to move there, which I don't think we're going to. This is a mining operation. This is a collection operation, and that should be done with robots. I mean, we don't send humans in to defuse bombs unless we have to. We send robots, and they're getting better and better and better, right?
And we do a very good job with that. And we have been doing that on the surface of Mars right now. So let's build and test these next generation robots that we're going to send to Mars. Let's test them on the moon. But why send people and build roads and launch platforms if we're really... Why do we need a base there? Why do we need to colonize the moon?
Well, to me, the only reason to do any of that, and from just a cost-benefit analysis, is if we have climate change in this world that gets to the point where it's uninhabitable. Well, guess what? We already have a climate change issue on the moon and Mars where we can't exist there. So we'd have to build the same infrastructure there, or if not more, than we would need to build here to keep us on Earth. So why just do it here? Unless we're going to blow up, okay? And I don't think that's on the climate change agenda that the Earth's going to blow up, okay? It seems to me it's cheaper to fix if we have to live underground or we have to put whatever it is, that we can do that here. And if we have to put big walls up to keep the ocean from swamping us, we can do that here. Or we can move people to the higher elevations, right? I understand only less than 5% of the planet is habitable by humans anyway. There's a lot of land out there because there's 25% is land that's not being utilized. I'm sure we could figure that out. Anyway, because if it gets warmer, then we can move north, right? And there's a lot of land north that is available. So I don't get the cost benefit on that. We can talk about that. Is there better minerals or stuff to mine on Mars versus the moon? That would be another thing I would consider if I was thinking about where to go to put the mining operations.
There's probably more on the surface of Mars. I'm not as familiar, but the one thing that people keep talking about on the surface of the moon is this helium-3, that we would be able to have a supply of helium-3 and we could use that for fusion reactors. And that's been the story for many, many years. And we're still trying to develop fusion type reactors. And so unless that becomes a reality, and then if it's commercially viable, I see people like Elon Musk, that should be done in the commercial sector.
And they will.
Right?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that's going to happen. The government will never be. I mean, that's why the government should go back to what you were saying, a research, right? The ones that opens the door, and then the private sector comes in and it spends the enormous amount of money that doesn't come out of taxpayer dollars to go ahead and close it, finish it.
We should be looking at the advanced far-term research to make exploration in space far from Earth possible. So you heard Jose talk about, well, humans can't get there. It takes six months to a year to travel there, to travel back. Cosmic radiation, it has a negative effect. Well, that's the exact reason why we should be looking at creating nuclear rockets and also plasma engines that are big enough that could basically transport us further in space much faster. Because there's no way we're going to be able to line our vehicles enough to protect us from galactic cosmic radiation and solar electric particles coming off the surface of the sun.
So you can't really stay there that long? Is that what you're saying, Charlie? You can't, because of the accumulation, you need to move in and out faster? Is that the thing for humans?
Well, what happens is as you're transporting from Earth to Mars, you're basically getting bombarded on all sides with galactic cosmic radiation. Once you're on the surface of the Mars, the planet blocks half of that radiation. But what you want to do is you want to be able to build habitats, whether it's in lava tubes on the surface of Mars or in the moon, that are protected naturally from the regolith on the planet or from cave structures on the planet. Otherwise, you have to develop these enclosures, these habitats that basically have this regolith surrounding it, basically to stop the bombardment of radiation.
Okay, so that's a challenge. I see that. Let's go over.
Yeah, so it's the transit getting there. You're not protected.
No matter what. I mean, you couldn't. You said you couldn't create. We don't have the ability to create a craft today that would be insulated from that. I see.
And so the theory is get there faster.
Right.
Get there in half the time.
Yeah. So like less X-rays. When you're just the same issue you have when you take too many X-rays. You got to wear the shield and all
exactly.
that. So let's talk about some of the other. They were talking about canceling this rocket program. What are they talking about there, Charlie?
That's the Space Launch System.
Okay.
And so that's the rocket that is basically built by NASA. It's using 1970s technology. It's using the same rocket engines, the SSMEs that we use on Space Shuttle. It's using 5 of them instead of 3. It has a larger external tank built exactly the same way that NASA built its hydrogen tanks, with the same external cryogenic insulation. The only thing different is the Orion capsule, right? The Orion capsule is a little bit larger than the Apollo capsule. It could take 4 to 6 people in that capsule. So it's a larger diameter. It's going to be coming in a little bit hotter, a little bit faster when it enters the Earth's atmosphere. And so those are the tests that they were doing on the heat shield, was on an unmanned vehicle, uncrewed vehicle, going around the moon and coming back. That was the latest test. And so the problem with this launch system is it's not reusable. It cost about $4 billion for one launch, and they only plan on using it once a year, if that often. And so it's had a lot of delays. It's had a lot of cost overruns. It's having technology issues right now. They can't even build a heat shield for it that is as good as the heat shield we had during Apollo, which tells you a lot about the state of NASA at the current time.
Yeah, with all the advances everywhere else in the world, how is it that they are now almost not at where they were, but actually fell behind.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that?
That's a very good reason. And NASA is not telling the public why they went from an Apollo-like design, filling the honeycomb with this Avcoat material, to just using these blocks of this material, which had a terrible response when it went around and entered the Earth's atmosphere. Large chunks, about in 100 places, came off as it was coming in through the Earth's atmosphere. Nothing like what happened during the Apollo heat shield. And so why NASA selected this heat shield when we have really good engineers working at Ames Research Center and other places that are developing better heat shields, I have no idea. And why they want to fly the same heat shield that they had problems with and only change the trajectory. I think the decisions they're making, John, are exactly, they're using the exact same decision process, poor decision process that they used for Challenger and Columbia. Okay. They're hiding things from the public that they, like, for instance, how bad the damage was. They tried to hide that from the public. They try to create these boards to make you think that they're actually doing some real research to understand what the real problem is, when these boards, really, they have no people on these boards that are actually doing independent research to check what NASA is doing. And so it's not an external board that is actually providing a value other than to look at what they're being told from the NASA researchers solving this problem and then to comment on it. They're not being asked, would you fly on this vehicle, or is this the right decision? They're just told to basically make your comments as to what you are seeing, what you are hearing from us. And so it's not an independent, what I would call an independent tiger team. It's an independent review board run by a lot of the same people that made the same bad decisions during Challenger and Columbia. Okay, so they basically hire people to work on these boards that are going to basically go along with NASA's primary objective, which is to fly as is and not make any changes to the heat shield.
So Charlie, I want to, before we get back into like moving some of the locations, I kind of like that. I don't know how big of a change that will be to get people out of DC or wherever they're at. That's Trump's sort of thing. He wants to do that across the board with all these bureaucracies to break down the sort of stranglehold of both the politicians and the lobbyists that are in DC. I think that makes a lot of sense. But let me get back to one thing, because I think this is really, again, this is sort of my broad stroke on bureaucracies in general. There's a situation that happens in the government because we are the largest bureaucracy, right? It's the largest that I am aware of, bureaucracy. And you see it in the military, you see it in any bureaucracy, but the government's the biggest. When NASA was first started, it was kind of outside of the bureaucracy, right? They were kind of a special thing, right? And when you're a special thing, you got to do what the scientists were meant to do without this oversight, without this problem. And they solved problems that were unattainable, even unthinkable when it was there, when you, at the very beginning, and then, got worse over time. Now they look like the post office. Okay. And not only do they need to be revamped, but they also need a new PR guy there because, I don't even think about NASA that much anymore. You're thinking about Elon. When you're talking about space, now it's Elon. We can't even get people up and back and forth to, for these space stations, they're stuck up there. We can't, it's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment what happened to NASA. And if you're in NASA, why aren't you embarrassed to the point where you're going to make change? And it's because it's a bureaucracy and people like their jobs. They make whatever money they make, and they're got friends in the private sector that they're probably doing contracts with. All of the bad things that happen in bureaucracies. That's why NASA is now, in my view, the post office. It's a huge drain, and Elon is like FedEx. He's going to take over delivery of the mail. And it is sad that it's so obvious. It happens all the time. And I'm glad that Trump's at least talking about it. I don't think anyone's talked about it in 10 or 15 years, Charlie, besides you.
This is exactly what's needed. And if we don't do it now, John, I think we've missed an opportunity because all the cards are lining up. We have the right people. But what I talk about in the second half of my book, you talked about, in the first half, I talk about how did we get here? How did NASA come from this amazing organization back in 1974? Even when I was working there, was an amazing place to work. I mean, we did nothing but research at the research centers, and we had an independent discretionary fund where we could do whatever we wanted to do. We weren't being told what to do from these huge program offices from human spaceflight that had all the money and would tell us what we had to work on. These are not the people that have the knowledge to tell you what technology we should be working on, right? And so we should be working on technology that's far into the future. I don't know if you could see up, I have an old heat pipe cooled wing leading edge in my office that was a competitive leading edge. That was the first thing I ever tested, was using heat pipes. And it was a metallic leading edge rather than the leading edge we have shuttle right now. We had groups of people at Ames Research Center, at Langley Research Center, just looking at thermal protection systems and advancing those systems. We stopped doing that research. And so what you have is Ames Research Center had a little bit of money. They were able to advance some of their ideas and some of their ablative heat shields and some of even their tile type heat shields. But the metallic thermal protection systems that we were working on at Langley stopped. But what's interesting is, if you notice on the next Starship launch, Starship 7, Elon is going to be testing metallic TPS, ceramic TPS, and even actively cooled TPS. In order for us to make these vehicles reusable and safe, we need to work on that technology. Right now, NASA is doing nothing to make spaceflight safer. If we don't make it safer, Elon will never be able to sell tickets for his mission to Mars, right? Unless it's safe. I believe Elon gets it. I don't believe NASA gets it. We're not doing anything safer.
So, Charlie, again, a lot of people, particularly younger people who believe in bureaucracies, the government, and socialism and all that, it's clear to me, if you look at what happened at NASA, it became a bureaucracy. It became beholden to who, like you said, the program directors. It became politicized. It did not, and the same thing's happening in universities, right? You see it when universities, the pure research, right, that they were supposed to do, they were getting their grants. It was not supposed to be tied to some baloney, political end. Like today, if you don't side with the climate change people, you can't get research funding. Okay, so that's not right. You should let people go do what they do. If they can prove one thing or the other, that's great. And
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. If someone comes up with a competing idea or something that disproves something that the majority of the scientists agree this is how it should be, like climate change, like anything else, their careers are put on hold. Or if they even have a career after that.
So that has ruined, in my view, the value of this pure research, which has always advanced things for the human race. And now the only chance that we have to save us is to have the private sector, which is still doing a great job without the government funding, like Elon and others, because they're doing it with the capitalist notion of profit margin and whatever. And they don't always create the best stuff. Like, there's a lot of stuff that they sell on Amazon that doesn't advance society. But he's doing great things because he's looking forward. He did great things with the electric car, even though I'm not a huge fan of it yet. But, he's starting to get people to the point when we get electricity where it can be renewable, cheap, and safe, then it'll make sense. We don't need to have, not even just because of the climate. I think it's just a more efficient vehicle once you get to that point. It's quieter, cleaner, it's just easier for pollution and all that stuff. So I'm on board with all that. I'm not on board with forcing it down the throats of the taxpayers, prematurely in a way that, harms our ability to do good research. But you see it in academia, you see it in the government, and I think I'm going to say this, and I think you'll agree with me, NASA could go the way of the post office and become completely irrelevant and unsalvageable because the private sector will have leapfrogged it to the point where there's no way to reclaim that glory. Am I correct in that?
No, I think you're right. I think we're going the way of the FAA, for instance, which can't do its job, doesn't have the right people. and they're basically delegating their responsibility for Boeing to do safety rather than regulate. But let's go back to what you were talking about with the bureaucracy and where NASA is now and what they're talking about, how they're trying to change NASA. And just combining centers, I think we definitely have to get rid of the layers of bureaucracy, the managers. And what I would say is think about, I go back to the book by Stanley McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, Team of Teams, and how having a network of teams transferring information, learning as a team, and with multiple cross-disciplinary skills in the team that you have, basically changing how they could be very agile in how they fight Al Qaeda in Iraq. It was very similar to the way our research centers used to operate, right? And so you don't need an organizational structure. I mean, you have a center director, maybe you have a couple of managers that are managing and leading particular high-tech areas that we want to develop, whether it's advanced computing, whether it's advanced thermal protection systems, next generation structures, next generation propulsion systems, and you have teams of scientists at different centers working together. They don't have to be co-located at the center, but in the technology that we have now, NASA's in the dark ages. Elon Musk, everything is connected digitally, and that's how NASA should be. And we should have this network, this dense network of research teams from multiple different centers working in these technology areas, some doing analysis, some having the facilities that they could do advanced hypersonics research at certain locations at NASA Ames, NASA Glenn, NASA Langley, when they have to do experiments. But you could collaborate so much more effectively virtually and connecting these people together in a collaborative network, so to speak. And I think that's what NASA should be investing in. Let them do the research in these advanced areas in propulsion, materials, structures, thermal protection systems, etc. And you don't need layers of managers. You don't need all these government rules to say how often you have a performance plan. Everything should be captured digitally so you know what everyone is doing, you know what they've achieved and what they haven't achieved. And we could also analyze that using artificial intelligence.
Yes.
We don't need levels of managers to push paper to do this.
So that's like anybody in the private sector knows that. So if you get to be a bloated company, eventually private equity is going to come along and take care of that for you, right? They're going to buy you, they're going to strip you down, and then they're going to, they're going to put you back in the public market as much more leaner, more efficient, more profitable business. People can argue with that if they want to, but they have a pretty good track record of doing it. I've been in that business for 32 years. I watched them take companies like Dun and Bradstreet and turn them around. Because they became this massive bloated bureaucracy, and in a matter of a year, my good buddy at CC Capital took that company and turned it around and doubled, no, actually 7 times the value. Can you believe that? In a year, they went up 7 times the value just by having outside people come in and get rid of all the junk, all these things that grew, all the weeds that grew up everywhere in the place because everyone had their little fiefdom. Same thing in the government. And so you need a little bit of that private sector, and I think academia needs a little bit of this as well. For example, if I want my tax dollars, I don't want someone. This is where I think all the problems come in, Charlie. Who gets to decide who gets the money, right? Though those people, then they decide who gets the money, how it gets spent, and then it becomes political. So you're going to whatever that person wants or whatever has motivated them, you're going to go that direction rather than come up there with your own concept of what you want to get funded. So the funding needs to be broken down in a different way so that you can get it no matter what your point of view or your political persuasion is. It's got to be fair so that everybody can get a chance at that money, and it can't just keep going to the guys that say what the program directors want them to say. I don't know how to break that up, but I got to tell you, we got to break that up because that's a real problem. In the private sector, you don't get funded because you have a political point of view. You get funded because you came up with a good idea that people think are going to work, and they're going to make their bets on it. I don't know how to make that happen in the government, Charlie, but I think there's got to be some better way to allocate these resources.
John, I think one of the things that's different in the government, and when you have research institutions, that's different in the private sector, right? When people come in and they look at what's being done at NASA Langley Research Center or at Ames Research Center, and they see wind tunnels here and wind tunnels there, and they think it's redundant, and they start cutting these facilities. And so it behooves us to have competing ideas from different people looking at the same problem differently. It may look redundant to someone from the outside, and they might cut off what we were doing at Langley and say, only do this at Ames. But what's very important is when you have competing ideas, it may look redundant, the facilities may look redundant, but you're growing people in those different locations that are learning how to solve and mentoring these people how to become good researchers and solve these problems and come up with innovative ideas. What the competing ideas are, and what we should use what I call collaborative competition. They're competing their ideas to say which one's the best for this particular launch vehicle. And by having that competition, you have people constantly looking over the shoulders at each other, finding errors, finding mistakes, advancing new levels of analysis and testing that we could use. So it could be a very good thing. And so if you have someone from the outside that is going to make NASA lean and efficient, they might look at that, and we've done this in the past, and they start closing these facilities. And once you close these facilities, it's impossible to get them back. And so we have to be very careful how we approach that. If you just take a Vivek and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and they're just looking for efficiency, not understanding that in order for you to do research, you have to try many different things and fail in order to be successful.
I think, and I hope, I can't speak for all three of them, but I think at least one or two of them will be smart enough to understand what you just said. I get that. The difference between the government and the private sector is that the government has to create its own internal competition. The private sector creates it on its own. So there's redundancy in the private sector. There's 10,000 people going after the same thing and all paying the same money.
Yeah.
And the winners will come out. In the government, you can't, you only, it's one government, so you have to go ahead and internally create these competing teams. And how many is probably the issue, not, that they shouldn't have them. They absolutely should. And when you look at that, they need people like you, Charlie, right, who are not in it for the money, not in it for the glory. You're in it because you want to say, hey, we need this team here doing the same thing as this team, because, ultimately between the two of them, maybe it costs us twice, but so what? In the private sector, there's 100 teams doing that, right? So you got to be able to figure that out. And I agree with you. And I don't see a problem with that. That's not probably what I'm thinking about. Well, like you said, how many layers of management do you need? That's the issue. How many guys you got to report up to the same stuff over and over again? That's the stuff that every organization needs to clean out. You don't get rid of the hard workers. You don't get rid of the scientists. You don't get rid of the people that are creating the value. You get rid of the people who are the overhead that are not adding value. So I think that can be done. And I'm not, I think, like I said, when Trump says things like that, it's just to shock the system. He's trying to shock the system so that they'll self-correct. Because if they don't, then there will be a big knife coming there, and and that's not always good. Like I said, sometimes even when private equity comes in and takes over a company, they get rid of some good stuff. They do. It's not a surgical scalpel. Sometimes it's a bit of an axe, okay, and that's what sometimes it needs to wake these companies up, and certainly the government. And I think the other thing, and I'll get back to you again, but when it comes to this stuff, Trump has been very successful, like him or not like him, by using these very bold threats of stuff to get people to come and make the changes that they need to change already. You see it in Mexico. You see he effectively got rid of Trudeau in Canada, and the Canadian people should be sending us a lot of freaking money for that, because he saved that country. And he's not even in office yet. He's got everyone coming to Mar-a-Lago. He got Facebook to get rid of their stupid baloney fictional fact checking. Can you imagine that? And he's not even in office yet. He did that because he told these guys he's going to take action, and they know it, and they need to know it. And that's, I think, should be hopefully at NASA that they get woke up over there, and he has the purse strings, right? So that's going to help. I mean, Congress says, but he has a lot of influence there, that they will wake him up. And I hope they do, because if they do, I want NASA. Like I said, Charlie, when I was growing up, NASA was everywhere. We all had NASA lunch boxes. We had, it was everywhere. We were so proud of our space program. It was part of the American, it was part of who we were. And I got to tell you, I guarantee you, very few millennials know anything about NASA. Can you believe that? They know nothing.
It breaks my heart, John. It does. And that was the reason I stayed, even though I was reassigned, I got beat up, yada, yada, yada. I stayed because I was constantly trying to fix the problem. And so, I spend a lot of time in the second half of the book talking about that, because to change the organization, you really have to change the culture, because we lost our research culture, and it's become a very toxic culture, a very toxic environment where people are afraid to speak up, and people in headquarters will tell you, oh, that's not true. It is true. I hear it all the time from people that trust me, that will come to me and tell me. Of course, they're not going to go to the administrator and the higher ups in NASA headquarters and tell them what they're seeing. But unfortunately, it's terrible, and it needs to change. And to do that, you're going to have to get rid of a lot of people. And you're going to have to put a system in place that can monitor. First, you need very, very strong leadership. You need a team of people that understand sociology, psychology, and human behavior, that understand what these negative behaviors could do. I just did a video book for Amy Edmondson. She wrote a book, The Fearless Organization. And so they came and filmed a couple of clips. And what Amy talks about is, what we're talking about is something that's pervasive in almost every industry you could think of: the medical, the military, financial sector, the aircraft industry, the aerospace industry, right? People are afraid to speak up. Nurses are afraid to say a doctor is doing something wrong. Pilots are afraid to question the commander in the cockpit when they're heading towards a mountain, well, you just saw it in a plane that took off and almost was it the Ohio football team that almost was in the other plane, right? And so in a research organization like the way I grew up, we were allowed to have these very tough conversations. We could argue, we could scream at each other, basically, but we always had to bring the data and the analysis to the table, share it openly so that it was vetted by everyone, and we relied on the knowledge that was generated using the scientific method and proven principles. And unless you have that organization, which we don't have in the human spaceflight organization. And that's why I had to describe that in the book, because people wouldn't believe this of NASA, this shining castle on the hill that we talked about when I was out there at the Terraverse Salon. People wouldn't believe that of NASA unless it was actually exposed, that they could be just as corrupt as a Boeing that's looking for financial gain, right, and market share. NASA could be just as corrupt.
Well, that is sort of the situation with all bureaucracy, because that's what they're going for. They're going for budget dollars and all that stuff. So, Charlie, as we wrap up, I just want to make a couple of points so that people will hopefully support us in this endeavor. Why would I even talk about this? Why would I have? Because people need to hear this. We need to get this out in front of the people. I hope that I can get Vivek and maybe Elon and even Trump maybe get you an invite down to Mar-a-Lago. They need to hear from you, okay? And the way we're going to do that, because then the mainstream media is not coming out calling on us, they're not calling on you. They're going to get their little soundbite guys that give them what they want to hear. But we got to get this in front of people, and I think there's an opportunity over the next 4 years. I hope. Again, I'm very optimistic. I mean, I've seen good things happen before he's even in office, where people are wanting to do the right thing. All the people that were hiding out, like you said, afraid to talk, afraid to say anything, they're now feeling maybe they can, that there's going to be an error for them. I hope that's the case. So we need to get you down there. We need to have more of these conversations. I'm going to stay on this topic with you. We're going to bring in some other people. I'm going to see if I can go through my contacts and see if I can get you an audience with these guys, because they ought to hear you. And by putting this content out there, maybe it'll somehow get to them, I hope. And that's what we're doing this for. It's not for personal gain. It's for trying,
I'm hearing good things thanks to you, John. People have been picking up the book. People on the transition team have been reading the book. And like I said, there are these amazing people that tried to teach this to NASA, like Amy Edmondson, Michael Roberto, Diane Vaughn. Another great organizational behavior person, Gary Hamill. These are some people you should definitely have on. They're amazing people, and they've been researching behavior in organizations, all different organizations, international organizations, and it's a daunting challenge, changing the bureaucracy, as Gary Hamill has discussed.
So the funny thing, I'm going to wrap this up. But funny. So first, I started this with the military because that's where I was doing a lot of work with the military, and they were having, they're having exactly the same problem, maybe even at a bigger scale, And there's a lot of great people in there that have been trying to change the culture, trying to fix that organization, and our intelligence agencies, which you can see are an absolute disaster. They can't even figure out what happened with this guy out in Vegas or what happened with the guy down in New Orleans. It's tragic, okay? And they're better than that. The people that work there are better than that. I know that. You know that. I trust those people with my life. I love them. They're great people, but they are not being allowed to do their job, and they're not sharing it with the public, so we can't kind of critique it. We can't help them fix it. But all these got to be done. We need the people you just mentioned, you and me. And the sad thing is, I'm going to say this, and you're going to laugh at me. I was trying to do this in the law business for 30 years and failed. There was no way to fix the stasis, the sort of catharsis inside of a law industry to change. They just were so slow to change. And now AI is going to make it happen. It wasn't until that we're a machine. So humans like me who understood it, try to understand it, we're very efficient. I did a lot of good things in the world. I did make a lot of changes, but they were not the kind of transformative changes that I thought we could have made. Like I went to fixed fee billing. I did all kinds of project management tools. I learned to price stuff out very, very accurately. I did a lot of great things in my group. Like I said, the team within the team, I couldn't get the firms to go that way. They were totally against it, because it wasn't the way they did it before. They wouldn't even adopt technology. We were using 10-year-old Microsoft, programs. I mean, literally, it's unbelievable. So I kind of gave up on the law business. I think AI will help get it done now, potentially, I hope. But I'm now focused on the military. I'm focused on NASA with you, and just bureaucracies in general, because if you fix one, you can fix them all. I think the principles that you're talking about are across the board. You don't need to, it's not specific to any particular bureaucracy. So we got to get this word out, and we got to stop talking about all the other stuff that people are wasting their time on. There's so much focus on these issues around, race and gender and all this stuff, which are not at the top of really the list of things we need to correct as a human race. And I think we should start focusing on the more important ones. So I want to thank you, Charlie. You want to say anything before we sign off? Because I want to make sure I give you the last word, and then we're going to sign off, and we'll do this again very soon.
No, I want to thank you, John, because sometimes when you fight these battles, you feel like you're all by yourself, and it's you against the world. And is anyone going to listen? I think we have an opportunity to make change. I know I sound very negative and beating up NASA, but I really do love NASA. And like you said, just like the military, there are amazing people there, and I want to improve NASA for those people that recognize what NASA could be and want to work there. And I would love to work with you on this and really spend more time talking about how do we fix these problems.
Yeah, I think the next one we should get into, where we're going to go over some of the things in your book. We'll talk about the social aspects and how to identify this stuff, and then we'll put some stuff out there. So maybe we can get some people to pay attention, and maybe we can get a little bit broader. Organizations want to come in. Maybe they want to hear you come speak at their organizations to help them out. I think this has to be organic. We'll try it. We'll see what we can do.
And maybe, you might want to think about maybe have a panel like four people
Sure.
or so come in and kick around ideas with you around the panel from different sectors even.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
worked, what didn't work,
I agree with you. We ought to get Jordan Peterson. He's an expert in psychology. He might be helpful to us. I'm going to see if he'll read your book and see what he thinks about it. He's a good, really smart guy. Anyway, if you like this content, if you like Charlie and you want to be a friend of Charlie, it's not easy. It took me a while. But if you want to be a friend of Charlie, send some good comments, give us some suggestions, help us get this word out. And if you do that, there's a chance to be a friend of Charlie. He's the greatest guy, and he's a lovely person.
And a friend of John, and an FOJ.
So anyway, hit the subscribe, hit the like button, hit the the bell, and send us some comments. Charlie, if you send us a nice comment, something that's useful, he'll respond. I'll respond, and we'll do this again. We're going to bring some more people in. This is a concept that should not be political. This should not be controversial. It's all about making it better for all of us on this earth and eventually out there in space where very few people other than Charlie have been able to venture. So thank you so much, Charlie. Love you. We're going to sign off now. Jen, thanks for having us. She did a great job again, as always, putting on this show for us. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.